Hello, everyone. Andy here from Biohazard Declassified. Hope everybody's doing well on this fantastic evening. We've got a very, very special guest here. We're joined by Shaun, who is the writer and director of Carrier, a Raccoon City story. Give us a little rundown of what Carrier, a Raccoon City story is, my good friend.
Sure thing. So, yeah, as you stated, I'm the creator and director and writer of Carrier. So, Carrier, a Raccoon City story is a film noir animated graphic novel that is set in Raccoon City, following the story of a Raccoon City police detective by the name of Samuel Othick. And on the surface level, Carrier is essentially it's a love letter to my two all-time favorite franchises, which is Resident Evil, first and foremost, and Max Payne. So it's a story of exploring what, the background was like for Raccoon City as a character, just what was going on in that city before the outbreak in 1998. So the initial story takes place in 1995, following the rise in crime, just unprecedented crime, organized crime families, mafias, mobsters, domestic terrorism, all that good stuff. It's kind of a blend of taking the game's lore and blending it in with, your quintessential noir-esque background. You can't really tell a noir story without having some kind of mafia or mobster affiliation with it. So, yeah, it's a two-part series. It takes place in the winter of 1995, and then concluding with the eradication of Raccoon City in 1998 September.
So, Shaun, I really want to know why is this a thing? Why have you gone through such extents to get this project made? I know you've spent absolute blood, sweat, and tears. We'll throw a couple of pictures up, and of course, I'll link your page in the description. Why have you gone to such lengths to produce Carrier, a Raccoon City story?
Man, there's a whole list of reasons behind that, but I think, jokingly on the surface, it mostly comes out of spite, just because I personally felt that after playing the games for so long, I mean, first and foremost, Resident Evil 3, the original one, is my all-time favorite game out of the entire franchise. And after spending years playing all through the games, I realized that I really love the environment, the setting of Raccoon City. And I just don't feel like after the games progressed forward, we never really got proper closure to that city. Sure, it got nuked at the end, but when the Outbreak games came out, that really gave you a deeper face as to what this particular city is like. And I kind of discovered on my own accord that I really wanted to know what was going on in this city. And the catalyst for that was when they announced Resident Evil 3 Remake, and that came out. And I was so looking forward to seeing all those locations of the city revisited. And even if we weren't going to get those locations revisited, which we didn't, I wouldn't mind replacing them with something new in the city that we wouldn't have seen before. They kind of had an idea with that with Moon's Donuts, which was a new location in the game, in the city. But when they kind of just left it at that, I realized I was asking myself, well, what else was going on in this city? Is there a red light district? What's the crime like? What does a video rental store there look like? So I had all these questions I wanted to answer. And I decided that I wanted to just explore more of what the city was like. And, it kind of just came to mind through that. Originally, I was going to just try to tell like a novelization or a story. And then I just kind of delved into, let's do a more visual side of things. Let's make it into a graphic novel.
And you're right in what you say. Raccoon City it's got its own character. I know you've referenced Ink Ribbon about this off air. Mm-hmm. That Raccoon City does have its own character. So for it, and again, we've mentioned it in the movie Welcome to Raccoon City, where not having a lot of character, your main aim really is to inject the life into or express Raccoon City through your novel, but through a slightly nuanced lens. It's more like a crime drama, isn't it? Really.
Yeah, I mean, that all comes from my love of Max Payne. That game, the first two games, really. But that whole kind of crime noir drama with the detective side of everything, it turned me on to that. I played at such a young game, but it turned me on to that whole subgenre of storytelling in and of itself, noir. So from there, I started picking up on other types of noir storytelling as well. You know, I'm a big fan of the Sin City novels, Sin City graphic novels. I got, you know, The Hard Goodbye, That Yellow Bastard, really great stuff by Frank Miller. And also, you know, exposed to a lot of great noir movies and TV series as well. I was finding myself going back and watching a lot of the old serials from like the 1940s, you know, like Federal Agent 99, a lot of the old Humphrey Bogart noir crime dramas back then as well. You know, The Big Take, The Big Sleep, Casablanca, of course. So that's just felt like I got exposed to that, and I always just naturally wanted to try to tell a story in that because it looked like such a cool setting. You know, everyone's dressed up so cool. Everyone's wearing great suits and such. So, you know, it makes for a really, really great background. And I just kind of had the thought that, hey, we never really seen anything Resident Evil like that before. So I was like, well, let's see if I can try to take my hand on it. But yeah, it's all about, even though it's told from a noir perspective, it's all about what the city was like. That's why it's in the title, to Raccoon City's story. So I wanted to explore just what this city was like, you know, for just everyone that's been living there and such.
Now, we can't not talk about the other main inspiration behind this, because this is what, when I saw this, well, a year ago, when you know, you used to pop into my chat, and just generally, I know you're very well connected on Twitter, you're very well connected in the Facebook groups. One thing that did immediately connect with me was the Max Payne inspiration, because this is kind of viewed through the lens of that fantastic those fantastic cutscenes that we saw back in Max Payne. So run us past that. Why specifically that style?
Well, that style, I mean, first of all, it was such an awesome thing to see when you play the first games. I've never seen a game kind of just pull a comic book style like that. I mean, they kind of did. My first exposure to something like that was the first Spider-Man game on N64. And much like in Max Payne, they put those graphic novel cutscenes because of a limitation on the hardware. So Max Payne just kind of did it in a style that just everything about that particular game just kind of subverted my expectations. I remember that was the first game that I ever rented for PS2 when I first got a PlayStation 2. And with a name like Max Payne, you know, I was expecting some just raunchy action, shoot 'em up, you know, just some kind of comedic buddy cop effect. And then playing it, and I was just like, completely did not see that coming, that it was such a dark, such a well-told story. You know, Sam Lake is one of the best story writers that I've ever had the fortune of playing games and seeing what he's got to create. But when they explained why they made the cutscenes and how they did them, it really was a callback to this whole DIY ethic that I'm just completely used to, you know, from spending like my teenage years up until these years playing in music, playing in bands and such, you know, with the whole punk rock aesthetic behind it is do it yourself. So when he was explaining how they made those cutscenes for the first game, they were essentially just taking anyone who was available on hand at the Remedy staff. And when they didn't have enough people, they were calling in family members to come and be a part of the cast. I don't know if anyone noticed this, but the main villain in the first Max Payne game, Nicole Horn, who's the female character, that's Sam Lake's mother, the Sam Lake who's the face of Max Payne. Okay. So when I saw that was the story behind it, I was like, oh, I could do that. You know, I got plenty of friends who are just totally up for whatever kind of crazy idea. I would just throw their way. And that, and just spending years on working with Photoshop was kind of just like, you know, I've been making visual like flyers and posters and merchandise covers for years. I could definitely just go ahead and start doing something like this myself.
Yeah, and you can definitely, you can just feel, it just gives it such character. Oh my God, like it just immediately stood out to me. Here's a great shot of Sam in front of Grady's Inn. We of course know Grady's Inn from the original Resident Evil 3 intro. Again, a lot of inspiration from the classic Resident Evil 1 to 3. So that again. Oh, go on.
That's the other thing that I've been doing too. Like there's little. One thing I love to do as well when it comes to storytelling is subtlety. I love subtlety. You know, if something's thrown in there it requires the audience or the reader to really kind of look for it, and when you finally do find it, it feels like you earned that discovery. So I throw little tidbits like that. That's a little bit more prevalent with the Grady's Inn, but little references to the game's world I like to just pepper into there. There's probably another shot in there somewhere where, you know, throughout the game, throughout Resident Evil 3, you see those posters for Burger Kong, even Resident Evil 2 as well. Little small things like that that help to do what I like to consider like world building. So little things like that I just like to include in there just to give you a sense of what is going on in this town, how it is its own world and its own thing. So little visual hints that I just try to drop everywhere that I can. Just sometimes I've had to explain to people like, yeah, so you recognize this thing that I put in there? Or you recognize this particular location? And like, not necessarily. Like Aquacure, you know, I'm sure everyone kind of knows that one because that's that was also part of the remake, but just trying to pull in as much from the original games as I can. Some of the backgrounds that I even used for the first pilot episode were ripped directly from the Resident Evil 2 and 3 fixed angle backgrounds. So I just threw that in there. That was more for like a little, you know, Easter egg for fans that could pick up on it if they can.
Yeah, and it is, and again, like the whole style you've got going here is just is absolutely glorious. That you've really paid attention to the art style, which I really love, and the lore building. It's just all there. It's like to me, and again, you know, feel free to jump in when I'm wrong. I feel like you've studied the books, the SD Perry novels. You've watched the films, and you're like, do you know what? I don't think there's a medium out there. Think something like Gotham, right, where it's kind of set in the Batman universe, but it explores Gotham in a way that hasn't been explored in like the big Hollywood films. Then this is where I put Carrier. Is in that substrata. Is that a fair assessment?
Oh, definitely, man, definitely. I mean, that's it, like on a surface level too, in a nutshell, because it goes a lot deeper than that. And I'm glad you brought up the S.D. Perry novels too, because I know that's something we were discussing beforehand. But I think to me, you know, we have our second iteration now of a live action attempt at Resident Evil. I just think that, you know, the smart thing to do at this point is just look at what S.D. Perry did with her novels. She did all the hard work for making a coherent narrative for the games into a storytelling. You know, the first game, read through those books, she's condensed and streamlined everything into like a good, you know, pace. Some puzzles were cut, but other puzzles from the games were still prevalent in there. There's a lot of mentions from elements from the game that are there, but in a more direct approach. And, you know, I just think it's just a no-brainer that you wouldn't follow along to that if you want to get a good, solid narrative. But also on top of that, in her books, she goes in depth into Raccoon City as well. One thing that I want to make mention of as well is I've been playing for my first exposure to the game was in 1997. I'd say like late 97, because right around the time I started playing the first game, the second game felt like it just came out as well. But I never got to actually play any of the games until maybe about 1999 when I got a copy of Resident Evil 2 for PC. But my only way of actually playing the games was through the S.D. Perry novels and the Wildstorm comics, because, you know, back in the 90s, you know, kids kind of just had one particular gaming console and that was it, at least for the most part. So me and my brother, we grew up playing with we had N64, but our neighbor, like a couple houses down the road from us, he had a PS1. So we'd go over there and see what games that he had and such. But yeah, growing up, never had a PlayStation 1, so I couldn't pick up any of the games. And then around 1998, me and my family moved down to Brazil. And down there, at least back in the 90s, trickle-down effect was really, really slow. So anything that was big that came out in the US took anywhere from like months to even a year or two before it came out down there. So, you know, by the time Resident Evil 3, I didn't even know Resident Evil 3 was a product until I was watching the equivalent of Brazilian MTV, and they had a video game hour on there. And then I noticed that there's this familiar looking kind of camera angles, and there's this girl wearing a blue top. It was essentially the fight sequence in the waste disposal for the original Resident Evil 3. But I just thought, hey, this whole game looks familiar. Like, this style looks cool. And I started watching, and all of a sudden, with no audio, just bam, Resident Evil 3. And I was like, they made a third one? And I didn't even know about it. So the only way I got to know the story was by reading all the books. So that's why those books hold a special place in my heart, and they're a huge influence in how I, you know, try to go about just telling a story as well.
So do you think that's played a major factor in how you view Resident Evil? because you know, for example, me, like I watched my parents play it, then I played it. I mean, I've had a very surface level interactions with the book, but nothing to probably what you've been involved with.
Oh, absolutely. I think the best, a prime example is, you know, as a book, when you write out a book, any kind of like narrative like that in that particular format, you have to really start to get into the character's head to really get to see, you know, who this person is. That's why in the first books, you know, you get to see Chris comes off as more of an actual person instead of just the plank of wood that he acts like in the first game. And for me, you know, for the longest time, I never completely understood all the hate that Steve Burnside got for Code Veronica. Because my first run through with Code Veronica was the book. I didn't have a PS2 in that game when Code Veronica X came out. So I ended up picking up the book when it was released. And SD Perry, she went into a full analysis. Like, you really got to get into the head of the character of Steve. And at least by way of the book, he's not an annoying, you know, little shit that he is in the game. I never got to see that side of him first and foremost. I got to see him more fleshed out, more, you know, he had actual motivations. He had actual emotions to him. There's a big depth as to who he was and what made him tick. So that's the same set for all the other characters in the books too. Like my first time really getting to know Jill and Chris and Wesker and all them was through SD Perry's depiction of what is going on inside their head. So when I played the games, it was like I was looking at them. I wasn't seeing just the character you played as on the screen. I was actually seeing, you know, what was going on in their heads and their backstory, and it kind of just blended into one.
So what we're going to do now, we're going to get into the nitty gritty of Carrier. So I know you said it's going to be split into two parts. There's kind of the 1995 Raccoon City, and then there's the kind of obviously pre September 28th, it's 27th, 28th event that happens. So talk us through the part. I know you've been absolutely balls deep in part one. Talk us through initially the setup, the characters, and the world that you've created.
For sure. So one thing I gotta throw in before I get started on that, just as a reference to the S.D. Perry novels, you know, even the title Carrier itself, that is a homage to S.D. Perry's novels in her writing. Because I forget which book that she established it, but she went from calling them zombies to infected to virus carriers to just simply carriers. And I really like that, how that sounded more like a grounded way to identify someone who's become infected with the virus. So that's Carrier, or I can sort of story. Carrier is a reference to S.D. Perry. So the whole premise is that when I was trying to come up with an idea for what story to tell, you know, I really came up with just the aesthetic first. I wanted to do a graphic novel that was like Max Payne, set in Raccoon City. As for a story, I started researching into the lore, and that's when I came across that. For anyone who's familiar with the game, they had this thing called the Bright Raccoon 21 plan, which is essentially it's a city development project that's established in the game, which also involved the initiation of stars. And the reason that they had stars initiated was to combat the rise in criminal activity as well as domestic terrorism. So when I saw the mention of domestic terrorism, that's when I thought, hey, that's an idea that's never really been expanded upon, at least not in the earlier storyline of Resident Evil. You know, and it's in the perfect time for it to be established as well, because that whole plan came about in 1996. So I set my story in 1995 before it as a way to kind of lead into the catalyst of what would enact that Bright Raccoon 21 plan. So my story centers around a series of domestic terrorist acts that have been committed against the Umbrella Corporation. It also makes sense in the time frame as well, because 1995 is mid-90s, and as you know, in the early 90s there was a whole rise in, you know, domestic terrorist activities as well, with the, you know, the Waco, Texas incident, the Oklahoma City bombing, Ruby Ridge. So the whole time frame just felt like it was the right point in time in the 90s to really just have it set. So the idea is there's domestic terrorism on the rise. It's starting to drift into the area of Raccoon City. There's a mysterious cult, a mysterious group that's somewhat involved in it. I don't want to get too specific into it because I don't want to spoil most of the story. But the idea is what their involvement is, why they're targeting Umbrella, who's behind it, and how this all culminates the creation and the formation of the Bright 21 plan, which is the formation of stars. So that's kind of just explaining in a nutshell, it's a long way of explaining how Stars pretty much starts. But then part 2 is going to just pretty much, it'll pretty much speak for itself. It's going to just be this detective's continuation and handling the whole outbreak situation in September for Raccoon City, and just telling a noir story, but with zombie killing involved in it too. On a surface level, it's going to get more in depth than that.
Yeah, no, and from what I've seen, I'm imagining that's probably going to be the case.
Yeah.
Okay, let's. It serves as quite a nice segue talking about the detective. Let's talk about Detective Sam Offick. Give us a bit of a backstory on who Sam Offick is.
So Sam is just someone that, he plays to the beat of a lot of noir tropes, and I embrace that wholeheartedly. Just to keep in mind, this is really like the first attempt I've ever made at telling a full grounded story like this, outside of like writing projects in high school and college and such. So when making the character of Sam, I just wanted to make that quintessential, noir hard-boiled detective, not pulling out any stops. It's going to have all that kind of noir tough guy talk, those inner head monologues. So Sam, he's been around the block for a bit. He used to be a bright-eyed, totally positive RPD recruit back starting, he's been on the force for 8 years, and being a beat cop and moving on to the detective, 8 years on the streets of Raccoon City just wore him out. He's no longer that optimistic person that he was at the beginning. He does what he needs to do to get the job done. He drifts the line between being, a proper hero and an anti-hero. He has his own vices that he has to contend with as well. He doesn't hide it, but he doesn't make it too out there as well. The drinking, the smoking, the pills, indulgences are just, he can't keep control of it, but he tries not to let it get in the way of getting the job done. He knows that he's not the best guy to, take solid advice from. He's not he's not an angel, but, when it comes down to it, he knows where he stands on the right and the wrong side of things.
So you have put together profiles, and for the benefit of our listeners, I'm just going to read out the profile of Detective Sam Offick. So he's an 8-year veteran with the RPD. Years of inner city violence and corruption turned this bright-eyed rookie into a. I can't read that. Is it booming?
Let me go ahead and help you out with that.
It's
booming.
But booming cynic. Despite his vices and bending the rules to the point that would make a gymnast blue, Sam knows he is on the side of the angels, even if he's all alone. So, but Sam's going to be your protagonist, like your protagonist throughout part 1 and part 2, right?
Yeah. So the way that I'm playing it out is he's the main protagonist, but every now and then the perspective will shift to other characters in the story just to show you what's going on. So, for instance, the next episode, the first legitimate episode, starts off not through his eyes or not following him at all, but following, one of the potential characters, one of the main antagonists in the story, and his first actual mission within Raccoon City conducted against the Umbrella Corporation. So it's going to be shifting, the narrative around just to give you a grander scope of what's going down with the story. And one thing I want to give a shout out to here is those, the way I have these character bios made out is also a homage to the Wildstorm comics from back in 1997, 98. So the ones they wrote that were the comic book versions of Resident Evil 1, Resident Evil 2. And those books and those comic books, like towards the end they had all the artwork that the artists came up with, and some of them had character bios that gave, their age, their height, their blood type. So that was just my way of kind of paying tribute to that.
Agreed. And what you have done as well is you have got what I love about this is you've got time-specific weaponry, but also lore-specific weaponry as well. I did see one of the characters, which will remain nameless, carrying a VP-70, which with a silencer on it, taking a little bit of creative liberty, but I did like it.
No, but that's one of those things too where it will be addressed as well. Because one thing I like to do is if I'm pointing anything out that's very lore specific, I make sure I give a solid explanation behind what its purpose is there. So, yeah, it's got a suppressor on it. It has a certain fire rate that isn't achieved the way that it is, but the explanation it's all there. It'll all be explained as you follow along through the story. But yeah, little things like that, you know, just homages to it. You know, in that picture that you have as well of the character bio for Sam, that revolver that he's using, it's also featured at the end of the episode. That's actually my fiance's revolver, but little did she know that when she bought it, it's the similar model to the Colt single action that Claire uses. It's one of the special guns that she gets, as well as the main sidearm of preference for Sam is a Browning high power, which is also
HP,
yeah, but that's because that's also pretty much, I believe, according to the lore, that was the standard sidearm for the police officers in the Raccoon City Police Department. So that's why I wanted to make sure I stay within those realms, within those boundaries.
So these, so for clarity, when you shot these scenes, they are actual weapons.
They're actual weapons, and I make sure they're completely unloaded, double checked, and everything. Proper safety protocol in there. Yeah, we're no Alec Baldwin on this set. Too soon? Nah.
Yeah. No, indeed. So that VP-70, for example, is a legitimate 1970s VP-70.
Oh, I wish. No, that one's actually a model that some friends of mine that follow. They run the page Raccoon City Stories, and on Instagram. Definitely give them a check out. They're really good guys. They posted a picture of them putting together a replica kit, and it was the VP-70. So I asked them, "Where'd you guys get this?" They told me where, and I picked it up because if you've ever looked for those things, they're super rare to find online. But if you do find them, they cost a pretty penny. And so, you know, I ended up just getting one super cheap with just the replica, and just the actual size of that thing. Jeez, I know it's an 18-round capacity, but that thing's massive. But that's what you see in the comic. That one's actually a replica that I put together myself.
Again, this is the sort of attention to detail that even the motion pictures have got wrong. So for the fact that you're spending this time getting these lore specific things together is I think it's essential for Carrier to survive, really. Pardon the pun.
And it's not like I'm going out of my way to do it either. It just feels like it's just natural to, you know, I've been in love with the franchise for so long with those early games that it just feels completely wrong to not, you know, go about it in that particular direction or pull certain attention to this kind of detail. You know, just it's a second nature to me. It's like, of course you would be using this kind of weaponry. Of course you'd be pulling out these kind of references, you know, like why wouldn't you be?
So, for example, like this scene, I love it. I think it's a thing of beauty. It's, I don't know. It's the way you've drawn everything and put this all together. It just feels. I think you're right. It feels natural. It doesn't feel like you're forcing it. Is what I'm saying. It feels like you've really created a character of Raccoon City. Is there any intention? I know you're going to be creating a web series. There's going to be many episodes and 2 parts. Is there any intention to actually create a comic book,
like a physical copy?
Yes.
I actually have already attempted that. I know that JJ made reference of it beforehand, but I made like a limited run of the initial pilot episode onto physical format. It's definitely a learning process. I only made about 10 or 15 of them and sent it out to people just to avoid any kind of legal issue with Capcom. Yeah, that's the initial run of it in black and white, just to see how the pictures put together. It's kind of complicated when you put those things together, man, like what gets printed on what side of the page. But I got the idea down. I had to kind of give them up for free just so I don't run into any kind of legal issues selling a product that's under the name of Capcom. But it's definitely one of those things that comes in after the thought. So I have been open to the idea of making physical copies, but because it requires so much of a different kind of changing of gears to get it done, I've kind of just laid that in the back burner until I get the initial, you know, like the episodes done first and foremost that are going to be online. Then transitioning over to the physical copies, because that requires completely shifting around, you know, all the sizes of the panels, putting them into pages that fit properly. So it's a challenge, but it's one that's just like, oh, I never knew how it was done before. figured out myself, and now I'm ready to keep doing more of them. But yeah, there will be physical copies later down the line.
Obviously, this may be a slightly personal question, so don't feel like I'm not holding a gun to your head. But do you feel like there's going to be any ramifications of you using the term Raccoon City story or anything like that? Have you researched that area adequately, or you just a case of, do you know what, I'm not intending on making any money from direct sales of this?
It's actually a little bit of both. I mean, to be honest, yeah, I looked into it and I kind of came to the conclusion that pretty sure, in a nutshell, Capcom's like they're very lenient with what fans do with their product, by the way. But essentially, if I'm not making a profit off of it, I don't imagine that they're going to have any kind of care, whatever it is that I do with it. Or if I make physical copies of it, as long as I'm not selling it or just there's ways around it. In terms of whether or not I'm trying to make money off of it, and in the grand scheme of things, I really have. I mean, it's a great idea. I'm not opposed to it, but first and foremost, I just want to tell the story, and I want to show it to people. That's why I've taken on the form of an animated series. It's pretty much released via YouTube, because yeah, it's all pretty much coming out of my own love and my love and heart and soul for this series. So, and if I were to try to monotonize it or anything like that, that's not on my top list of priorities. It's just I want to tell the story. I want to get it out there, and I want to see what people, what my perspective is on what the city should be like, and what else should have been occurring behind the scenes, and the Resident Evil franchise and the Resident Evil storyline. So yeah, there's no solid drive to really make any kind of money off of it, because really at the end of the day too, sure, it's great if I can make some cash on it, but the most valuable thing out of this entire ordeal is time. Time to me is more valuable than any kind of money you can throw my way, because you can give me as much money as you want, but at the end of the day, I need time to make this thing happen.
Yeah, and time's undefeated. It's a resource that you can never get back, and you're spending it creating a fantastic series in. Set in the Resident Evil universe. We've got a couple of screens going on in the background, just kind of showing what
I was really happy when I got this. So that image there, that Girl 13, obviously, if you played the original Resident Evil 3, Girl 13 is one of the popular locations that you meet up with Carlos, and it plays into the gameplay. That was actually a diner that I came across. That's an actual location right down the road from where I live. Another thing I got to call back on too is that this whole thing really kickstarted and actually got into the momentum when COVID hit, when the quarantines came down and we all had all that time to spend at home doing nothing. That's when, when everyone was sitting at home closed off, I just go out for bike rides at night through the downtown area, and it was just a literal ghost town, no one around. And that particular diner, I love the way it was lit up at night, and everything about it that's straight up just what's there. That picture, I took it myself, and yeah, it was just edited it all in there after the fact. And that's one thing I started doing to get a lot of locations down, which is first and foremost, just on my own, just doing location scouting. I would go out in the middle of the night, probably around 12 or 1 o'clock at night, and just scout areas that look like they could fit into a Midwestern town. Like this particular scene here, actually that background, believe it or not, that's from Operation Raccoon City.
Operation Raccoon City was actually useful for something. Look at that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But again, the presentation of this, obviously clear inspiration from Max Payne. And I think that deliverable does kind of push that noir, gritty, hard-hitting story that I think you want to go for.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. There's so what I ended up trying to do, typically what I try to do is pepper in, so this shot right here, this is actually an amalgamation of the alleyway from Resident Evil 3, and then the starting point of Resident Evil 2 is at the very end. So just blending it together and just kind of, showing that here's some real life locations of what Raccoon City would look like, as well as locations within the game that could easily blend into it. So that's why I try to just incorporate as much of the source material as I can and just have fun with it. I was actually, before I even made this shot, I knew exactly what backgrounds from the games I wanted to try and include. You know, this particular shot right here, that whole little street that he's on, that's the street that leads up to the trolley car in RE3.
Yeah, yeah.
And then that bus in the background, that's the bus from the beginning of Resident Evil 2. So I knew exactly what I wanted to do. The whole question was, all right, setting up the camera and posing. Oh, by the way, all the images here, this whole entire first episode was all done by me in a tripod, some duct tape, and using the 10-second timer on the camera.
I love this for our audio viewers. It's a shot of Sam overlooking just absolute destruction, and this is a real life location, isn't it?
Yeah, that's actually that's right down the road from my apartment. That's this old abandoned, boarded up. I guess it used to be some kind of office attached to a barber shop, but I remember walking past it at night and just where it says Eagle Nest Solution, the billboard up there, that's an actual billboard. It doesn't say Eagle Nest on it, of course, but it just, the architecture of it stood out so much. It looked like this 50s Deco Noir style building. And I just remember looking at it and thinking that could make for a great private eye detective agency. So yeah, part of the story is too that my character goes from detective for the RPD to being a private investigator as part of, it's explained in the first pilot episode, so I'm not spoiling too much, but the case that the first season takes place in is the case that essentially cost him his job. So you realize if the case opens his eyes to the corruption, how deep Umbrella's clutches go into the RPD, and he just decides he's not dealing with it. So he just throws down his badge and abandons the RPD. Hopefully thinking that, you know, because he might know a bit, the case opened his eyes to a lot of things, hoping in the end that, you know, he's not worth the price of a hit by the Umbrella Corporation. Hopefully he's just more of a nobody that they won't be concerned with whether or not he'll talk. So that's a bit of the explanation there. But everything here, those inside sections, built it straight from hand, and you can see that there's a brown and a green kind of color scheme going on. That's my homage to the library from Resident Evil 2, just because I really like the color scheme that was going on inside there. And yeah, I love this image with the smashed RPD plaque. That's just to show just how. To me, it's kind of like, oh, let me just show how far from grace he's fallen. You know, it's just kind of a shatter. It's like a depiction of his shattered past as a police detective. You know, little subtle cues like that. So,
how is this going to be? I know we've mentioned it's obviously a mini series. How is this going to be delivered to people to watch? For people to watch?
So it's pretty much delivered in a form that's very convenient for me since, you know, I'm making it, but it's all just coming out on my YouTube channel. They will be released. Pretty much you can find all the episodes there. Additional like artwork and, you know, work in progress. You can find that all through like the Twitter and the Instagram pages when I upgrade them or update them. And I will say that for the time being, I'm going to go ahead. I'm committing to it. The next episode for episode 1 of season 1, part 1, is set to debut for December 30th of this month. So that's when we actually get to see, you know, more of Raccoon City set in the snowy time of December 4th, 1998.
You heard it here first. You heard it here first on the BHD podcast. Carrier episode 1, season 1, episode 1, coming out December 30th. Absolutely glorious. So the pilot, where does the pilot fit into all of that then?
So the pilot is, the way that it's set up too is also kind of, you know, a subtle reference, subtle homage to the way that Max Payne starts off. It starts off just in the middle of it, like in the middle of all the shit. Although Max Payne is closer to the end of it all, but I wanted it to take place close to the end, but just in the middle of the storm. You know, the wind is blowing. You have no idea which way it's blowing from. So I wanted to showcase. So it takes place more so towards like the middle of part 2, if I was to give it a chronological sense. So it's kind of just showing that everything kind of falling apart. You know, the initial story of the first part has already been done. It's already been told. Sam's already gone through hell and back. And right now he's just trying to come up with some kind of plan, some kind of way to get himself out of the city, as well as take care of a few loose ends that are still tied in with part 1. You know, just because part 1 ends where it will there's still, you know, aftershocks that he has to contend with. There's still loose ends that were left untied. There's still characters that will have, you know, an story arc that will conclude in September of 1998. And there's a lot of things left undone that he still has to take care of, you know, given that the fact that the city's falling apart, and it's all related to this case that he was involved in, that to a sense, you know, had he been better at his job, had he not been so indulgent in his vices, had he been a little bit smarter, you know, maybe could have even done something to prevent this entire outbreak from occurring. It's the kind of things that, you know, I'm playing with to weigh down on his character, so to speak.
And kind of another kind of unique thing about Carrier is the collaboration with the RE community and how that's quite an important thing to you. And one of the big things that I saw, Avalanche Reviews, an absolute god of a man, love him to death. We've had him on the podcast before, love talking with him. You've got him. You've secured the rights to Avalanche Reviews to appear.
Yeah, man. He's a Florida native too, so it was kind of just
Florida
like,
man.
I was trying to, you know, first and foremost, that comes from what I like to, you know, I love to do world building. It's one of those things where I've just seen it done so well in other games that I want to take my hand at it. So yeah, Jared from Avalanche Reviews, he plays Charlie Brave, who's the main radio station DJ for Gravedigger FM, which is the one and only spot for late night radio for all the graveyard shifters and the late night owls of Raccoon City. So yeah,
I love it. So much detail, man. So much detail.
I had the character created. It was just more of a question of who. You know, I was trying to reach out to friends of mine in the area, old bandmates who were singers as well, that I knew would have some kind of vocal prowess, and then kind of just clicked. I'm like, well, what kind of voice? I need a smooth talk. It's a late night show. You want to have like a smooth voice. I'm like, damn, Jared's actually got a pretty damn good voice. Not only that, that guy knows his shit. He knows everything when it comes to microphones and all that good recording techniques and styles. Like that pretty much just takes care of its own. So I just reached out to him like, hey man, here's this character that I have. Here's the rundown. Here's what the whole sequence is going to be like. Would you be interested? He's like, oh yeah, dude, I'll go ahead and do it. So he sent everything over to me just like I thought he would. It would be like crisp, clean audio. It's like I left it kind of just clean and plain for you to screw around with. Like, man, you nailed it. You nailed it perfectly. Yeah, and that's just the beginning of it too. So I have more ways that I'm trying to tie in characters, you know, yourself included, like we discussed the other day.
But that's such a key part, is it doesn't just become, obviously, ultimately, it's your vision, it's where you want to take the story. But, you know, the Resident Evil community is unique. They love getting involved in community projects. This could be the big community project. I mean, how many community projects have we seen that have fallen through? I mean, you know, I had Aidan Watkins on the podcast the other day, and he was talking about how he was going to remake Resident Evil Gaiden and have like loads of collaborators, but unfortunately it fell through. So,
man, I was waiting on that one too, because I got that game when it first launched, and I never got around to beating that one.
Yeah, but again, it's a unique platform. It's something that, it's such a simple idea in principle. Like, let's just bring Gaiden to a traditional Resident Evil format. I think it makes absolute total sense to me, because I tried playing Gaiden a few years ago. I can't do it. It's just, I hate it. The music goes round my ears and ears, and I just can't deal with it. However, somebody translated that into more traditional Resident Evil format. Maybe I'll be open to playing it. Unfortunately, it did fall through. And I was talking to Aidan, it might make a return in some capacity with a different team. So fingers crossed for that. But going back to, of course, Carrier, the collaboration and having kind of different voice actors and bits and pieces is going to be a hard journey. Yeah, I know what it's like putting films together. It's going to be an absolute nightmare. You're going to pull your hair out left, right, and center. But ultimately, you're going to fulfill your vision. But you do have the unique factor in that, you know, I know obviously you're taking photographs around your area, you're using Photoshop for the most part. You're not really it's such a controlled environment. You're not really constrained by like when I was shooting my short film, it was like, getting the licenses, making sure members of the public don't walk through the shot, because we wanted it all kind of gritty and handheld. It was a pain in the fucking ass. It really was. But the benefit of your story is completely controlled, in a controlled environment.
It's all over the place too with how I try to build the sequences out as well. Some of them, I just go ahead and build it out straight by hand. I'll take references. I'll go like Google Images. For the entire intro sequence of this next episode, it starts off, driving through the city streets. The overlook of the city, but the first part of that intro is set at a guard booth at Umbrella Research Facility, which is. It's based off of the research facility that's the Research and Development Center that's in Outbreak File 2, where I believe End of the Road, that's where that one takes place. Since there's no really high-quality image for me to kind of pull from online, except for a couple of grainy stills pulled from the intro sequence for that particular level, I've had to pretty much just build it out by hand to what I would imagine it would look like in a kind of a grounded scenario. So if I can't find an actual reference on it, I just build it from scratch off what I see in my head. Other times, when I go running around snapping the pictures myself, that in and of itself has a bit of some drawbacks, since I live in South Florida, and South Florida towns, they look like South Florida. They don't look like the Midwest. There's palm trees. There's deco artwork everywhere. So I have like a rule of thumb when I go shooting stuff down here. It's try to get as much red brick walls in there as I can, and shots that have at the minimum amount of palm trees as possible. So all that stuff, if it's in the shot to an extent, I can always Photoshop it out. But beyond that as well, I try to use actual locations for reference as well, because I like to try to make it more of a relatable area that looks real. That's what stood out about Resident Evil 2, especially Resident Evil 3 to me. When I first got around to really playing those games and beating them, which is like around 1999 or 2000, I was living down in Brazil, in São Paulo, which is still one of the largest cities in the world. And just seeing all those city streets, those alleyways, those things, it was like I could look out my window and it's right there. I found it highly relatable, and that's why I try to find cities that I feel fit the mold of what would be a quintessential Raccoon City, and then take images from there and try to just trace them out, build on top of that. And in doing so, I've come to the conclusion that, in my opinion, Charleston, West Virginia is the perfect example of what Raccoon City would look like. It's a town that's not a big city like Toronto or Montreal, where the backdrop is and that they use for Resident Evil 2 Remake. And it's not a small town to the scale of Welcome to Raccoon City showed. It's a town that you would imagine it would have a downtown area. You would imagine it have a trolley car system. It would have, all sorts of inner city urban environments, but not big enough that it would be, beyond the realm of an outbreak occurring and not being contained. And it's funny how I came to that conclusion. Last July, me and my fiance, we drove up to Ohio. That's where her family's from. So as we were driving through West Virginia, we've been in the car for hours. I was exhausted. I was beat. It had been like over a year or two since I'd done any kind of long distance road traveling. So I was just not feeling too well, but we had this agreement, this pact that the minute we crossed the border into West Virginia, which is where you got to go to get to Ohio from the direction we're going, we were going to blast Country Road by John Denver. So we crossed into the border, and about an hour driving through, we're in it's late afternoon, sun's coming down. We're driving between two foresty hills. I've already, since beyond that point, affiliated everything looking like the Arklay Mountains. And I'm just ready to kind of just, try to get some sleep or something. She turns on the music, cranks up that volume, and we're coming over this crest on the highway. And as soon as that friggin' chorus hits, the Country Road, Take Me Home, I see the tops of these buildings start to come up over the horizon. The sun just seems to be shining down right on top of it. And all of a sudden, I just come straight to life. I got this like third wind out of nowhere, and I just get blessed with this view of this whole downtown area on a river, much like Raccoon City is if you look at the map and everything. And it just looked like that was it. Like, it's a downtown area. It's not that big, but still big enough that you could imagine certain locations from the game being I could just instantly see where the clock tower would be, where the RPD would be located. And we were just driving around this thing. But most importantly, the woods, the forest, the mountains right up to the back of the city, like just the outskirts of the town, you could see it. It just fit the mold perfectly in my mind. The minute I saw that, I'm like, that's it. And I'm like, hey, can we please drive through there? Like, I know we got to get to Ohio before sundown, but do you think we could just cross through there really quick? So we did like a quick drive around to it, so just I could get like a visual idea of what it looked like. So yeah, just that's what I try to base on. If you look in it too, one of the images I got supplied is my rendition of the RPD. That's based off an actual municipal federal law enforcement structure in Charleston, West Virginia, which it serves as a pseudo police station and a courthouse. It looks to the part like the Raccoon Police Department, and I based my entire drawing on top of it. So that's one of those things where it blew my mind. I think, yeah, that's actually a with some subtle, changes and edits made to it, so it doesn't look like the legitimate location. But that entire structure, that's exactly how you would see it in Charleston, West Virginia. So that just further served my argument that this place is what I would use for visualizations for the comic.
So again, we're on the topic specifically of Raccoon City and the character of Raccoon City. We've seen we've got a sneak peek into your character of Raccoon City. I'd like for you to do a critique of Resident Evil's Welcome to Raccoon City's Raccoon City. How do you think they wanted to portray their Raccoon City, and was it effective? And do you think they did Raccoon City enough justice? Just the location and the character of Raccoon City.
So, for Welcome to Raccoon City, first and foremost, I'll say I wasn't happy with the depiction of what Raccoon City looked like. As a ghost town, to me, that's not Raccoon City. However, for the scope of the film, that's what the director wanted, and I respected that. Okay, that's his version of it. However, where I felt that he didn't deliver on was, all right, so if that's going to be Raccoon City, what else is there in that particular town? What other references to the game's locations can you show us? Because the only things we really got to see was essentially just a couple of streets, some blurred avenues, Emmy's Diner, and the RPD, and Chris's house. Well, if this is the world that you're building, the movie's called Welcome to Raccoon City. What else about this town? What's your take on it? Are you going to show us where the clock tower would be? Are you going to show us where the potential, where the newspaper office might be at? Maybe the Arclay shops or anything like that. What is this particular city's version of that going to look like? And I just felt like that wasn't even delivered at all. I would, even though I didn't like the depiction, I'd still like to see what else of this city relates to the game, or just what this particular town is like. And it just didn't delve into it. I can understand that it's definitely based upon budgetary limits. I was kind of curious to see the direction he was going with it when in initial interviews, Johannes Roberts stated that it was something similar to Deer Hunter, which is a movie that I'm surprised if anyone would even know the name of these days. That's a very specific name to be pulling from. So, I gave him credit for that. And I know that the budgetary constraints kind of reduced it down to the size as it was. Before they even gave us any kind of idea of what they were going to show on film, as soon as I found out what the town it was based in that they were filming, Sudbury, Ontario, oh man, I went to town researching that place left and right. I went through there with a fine comb, like using Google image street searches to see, can this town be a good stand-in for Raccoon City? And the thing is, Sudbury actually, for the most part, could look like Raccoon City. They just didn't go with that particular depiction of it either. And I gotta say, one thing that I know it was intended to be fan service, but to me, it just stood out like a sore thumb, is you have this tiny little town, and then there's this massive structure that is the RPD that just doesn't look like it looks like the entire town could just fit inside this location. Like, I get, like, yeah, it's supposed to be a museum, but are we supposed to understand that it's a museum in the movie? Does that explain why would they make this town so small, but then go all out and making this huge structure? Just a lot of things that I know is done for fan service, but just didn't fit the scale right. I would have actually been more impressed or more interested if they showed an RPD that fit the aesthetic of that town. A smaller RPD, but still had, you know, references to the structure, you know, instead of a massive main hall, a main hall that kind of fit the general structure of it, that was kind of familiar, but made sense for that general location. I did actually have like, not so much an argument, but a bit of a discussion with someone on Twitter where like, I didn't like the way that it was depicted in the movie, looking like it was straight from the game. And someone was like, are you just getting mad at the fact that it looks like it's straight from the game? And I said, well, yes and no. I mean, let me put it this way. You know, the RPD from Resident Evil 2 Remake, is that a favorite location? You know, do we like that? Did we think that was a great location? I sure as hell do. Is it a one-to-one scale recreation of the RPD from the original one? No. They modernized it. They gave different interpretations of it. The whole structure just got completely moved around. Same thing for the Spencer Mansion in the remake of RE1. It's not a one-to-one recreation, but it's made to have, it's familiar, you know, in its design, but it's not an actual, you know, one-to-one scale carbon copy. And that's what I wanted to see. I wanted to see what would this director's interpretation of the RPD look like? How can we, you know, filter that one again so it looks like something familiar yet different? And that's where I just felt like, you know, let down on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I got mixed opinions about the entire film that I'll dive into on another podcast. But in terms of Raccoon City itself, it just I understood, like, actually the vision that Roberts was going for. I did get his vision of Raccoon City is as a dying city, rather than the kind of bustling Midwestern town funded by a pharmaceutical corporation. You know, it's prosperous, that sort of thing. A lot of investment got brought to the town because of that. Whereas, and then there's the outbreak in the games, versus this, where it's kind of, it's almost at the end of its, like, the city's at the end of its natural life. So to call it Welcome to Raccoon City, it really should be like the ruins of Raccoon City, because that's what effectively what it is. Absolute shadow of its former self, if we was quoting the first Resident Evil game,
or like Sayonara from Raccoon City.
Yeah, exactly that. And I just feel like that's like hashtag not my Raccoon City. It's like Raccoon City is
exactly.
It's a bustling, you know, tons of investment. I mean, even Emmy's Diner, for example, in Welcome to Raccoon City, didn't feel like it was even in Raccoon City. It felt like it was in like Arkley North or something, somewhere like that, somewhere in like on the outskirts of Arkley, rather than like inside.
It just didn't blend well together. And, you know, I guess that there could be a whole reason for why the editing process didn't make it come out the way that it did. You know, I'm not on the production team. I probably won't know until someone discloses that information later down the line. But yeah, I mean, you know, I also like to think, sure, a lot of people were up in arms about the particular casting choices for the characters. But for me, the biggest miscast role was the city. It was just, you know, it's a hustling, bustling city. It makes more sense from a narrative perspective that the city would actually be the opposite of that. If this is where Umbrella kind of laid its roots out and established itself, you know, they helped to build up the city. You know, that's their pride and joy. It also works for their cover story as well as a beneficial, you know, pharmaceutical company, a multi-billion-dollar company. For them to just go ahead and pack up and leave and just kind of let this town die seems like it's the opposite of what would make sense for in general, for, you know, what would be the Umbrella Corporation as part of the game's lore and just general lore in general and just general storytelling.
Yeah, no, can't disagree. And the big thing, I feel like I can't make an accurate opinion on Raccoon City until it's out on Blu-ray and we have a look at, like, if there's
the cut scenes.
Yeah, because I feel like Kendo Gunshot, for example. Where is the Kendo Gunshot? Like, I remember leaking it. I remember not leaking it. Excuse me. I remember sharing the pictures of the Kendo Gunshot, being like, "Whoa, this is an actual thing." Didn't appear in the film.
There's actually, in one of the pictures that was leaked, there's a girl standing there with holding like a Gatorade bottle, kind of just pointing at the sign. I found out who that girl was. She works at a tattoo shop right across the street from where the actual location is. And so I was just kind of just trying to pick her brain as much as I could without sounding like some random creep on the internet asking a bunch of random questions. And she said that, and from her explanation, it's because that I researched it as well. The Kendo gun shop is literally on the same block and the same strip as the Emmy's Diner. As soon as I found out like the shooting locations, I even went through. I think the first post I ever made on Reddit was over a year ago. I made a map that I compiled of all the listed shooting locations that was on record for what they did. I went as deep as looking into like local Sudbury news articles to see where they were mentioning to expect traffic shutdowns, because that would be affiliated with people shutting down the street to do filming. It's part of like the, it's that part of the work I do is I'm an analyst, so I got to look really deep into a lot of things. So I just created and compiled this entire map that shows all the locations in the Sudbury map area of where they filmed. And yeah, it's right next to each other. In fact, there's a sequence that for a split second, you do get to see the gun shop Kendo. And that's when Claire's on her motorcycle and she looks over at Emmy's Diner and you see the waitress come out, kind of just stand there just doing nothing. So yeah, it's one of those things where just hopefully we get to see there's a bit more of a coherent story behind it when they release it.
I feel like there was a lot of interference on this project from other parties. Yeah. Or at the very least, major scenes were cut, which would have given us context that we probably needed.
I kind of have a theory behind that. There goes my fiance. I have this theory that it's kind of been up in the air too what the budget of the film was. There's sources saying it was 40 million. There's sources saying it's 25 million. I'm pretty certain that the movie entered pre-production in around 2019. I want to say so. The finalizations and all the ink being dried on the papers of the contracts, probably on paper, it was still indicated to have a $40 million production. Then once COVID hit, and studios started seeing a lot of money lost in the movie theaters since people weren't showing up. I'm positive that's a studio like Sony kind of just did like a bit of, a cost benefit analysis and just started slashing budgets left and right on things they didn't consider a priority project. Things like Spider-Man series, the Venom, anything MCU related, obviously they went off without a hitch. I think they might have seen Resident Evil, saw what it possibly could net itself for a price, and they contacted them and like, look, I know you guys already got a lot of things by way of production. Your options are either cut your costs and just leave it be, or continue production with half the budget. I'm pretty sure that that's what the whole turnout ended up being for that movie.
Yeah, and I'm still blown away that they opted for a theatrical release. I would have teamed up with Amazon Prime, or I don't know if Sony's got its own streaming service or something like that. I mean, Disney Plus does it all the time. I know Warner Brothers have done it.
They do. It's called Crackle.
Crackle,
yeah, it's my brother's kind of involved with managing the site for that. But yeah, that's where they put all their Sony related products, all their cartoon shows or TV shows or original series and their movies as well. So it might see a release on that, but why they opted to not release it on that, I'm not sure. But then again, that's a free service. They pay for it by ad revenue and such with commercials.
Well, yeah. But I mean, with the outreach, because I feel like in the UK, people still aren't going to the theater. And when we went and watched it in the US in the theater, aside from the fact we had our own screen, like we probably would have been, and from what the anecdotal evidence I saw online, we were probably going to be the only ones in the theater anyway.
Yeah. No, same here. When we went, it was like had a group of maybe about 8 people that we went together, and outside of us, there was maybe about total 4 or 5 other people in the theater with us. So, and we went on the I guess the midnight premiere, even though we went like around 9 o'clock to go see it the night before. So I wasn't expecting a big crowd either way, because I think the movie released on a Wednesday. So we went on a Tuesday night, and even then, I doubt that they were going to make much back in that particular regards. It's kind of funny. I'm reading the comments over here, and there's a lot of people just saying Leon Doppelganger. The funny thing was, like, as a kid growing up, first and foremost, my favorite character, when there was just still a first game, was Wesker. I had no idea that he ended up it wasn't until like about 2 years later that I found out that Wesker was the villain of the first game. I had no idea because I never beat it. He looked so cool with the shades, and he had blonde hair like me. So that's why I was like, yeah, Wesker is like my favorite character out of that game. Even when I read the comic books when I was a kid, I didn't even really read them. I was like 6 or 7 years old at that point. I didn't care about reading. That's when like reading was for nerds. You know, you watch TV instead. So I would look at the pictures of the comic, and when it showed, you know, Wesker being skewered by the tyrant, I just thought that, oh no, Wesker dies. It wasn't until I beat the game in like 1999 that I found out, like, oh, this motherfucker going behind everyone's back like that.
I was interested to see how they were going to do that in the movie, like because they did have pre-release on it to say that he was going to be a bad guy that was going to double cross.
It's not the best interpretation of it, and on top of that, if they do make themselves sequels, it's not the Wesker villain that everyone's going to hope for. If it is, it doesn't make sense because at the end of it all, you know, he's dying, saying, you know, for spoilers for anyone who hasn't seen the movie yet, but as he's dying and he's explaining stuff to Jill, he's reluctant about the decisions that he made. And Wesker is not a reluctant villain. Wesker knows exactly what he's doing. You know, he's like a heat-seeking missile. He knows what he's going for. So if they do make him into the villain that he's intended to be, they can either make him one of two villains. They can make him the one that he would naturally progress as. So he's the villain Wesker, but he kind of is second guessing his actions. He's not completely all for it, but he knows that he's in debt now to Ada. Or they're going to make him the video game villain, and it's just going to make absolutely no sense as to how he progressed from who he was at the end of the first movie to who he would be in the next movie. So they got a mess to contend with over there, man.
Yeah, I just felt like, I don't know, because it's always the problem of dealing with a character that's got that exists on another medium that's well established. Mm-hmm. They needed to have it's like the key of any great story. There needs to be a change in character from where they started to where they are to where they are now. And I think that Roberts pretty much had to force that unnecessary angle of like him going, I'm evil, but I'm actually a good guy. And it's like, no, dude, you're an absolute cock.
Like there has to be a conflict, you know? Yeah. I honestly think, you know, for the way that for the state of the movie, I think it could have been a lot better. Maybe not great, but it would have been a lot better if they just condensed it to one single storyline with the first game. To me, honestly, the best parts of that movie was when anything that centered around the mansion. Like from the point where you see them flying over the Arklay Mountain. The soundtrack is the number one best thing about that movie, I will say. The Mark Corvin, I believe his name is, the composer, did a phenomenal job with that. So the sequence when they're flying the chopper over the Arklay Hills and you see that perspective from the helicopter, that spotlight, oh, that gave me chills. All I could imagine that was watching that, and I could just think that I'm going to rewatch that sequence over and over again, and in my head, I'm going to play out the movie that it should have been. And when they find the Crash Bravo team car, to the point where they're searching around the mansion, to the point where Chris is in the dining room, I think one thing they did that I will give credit for is when he's in the dining room, he's just hiding by the light of the lighter, and you just can hear the zombies all around all in the rooms around him, just stumbling, shuffling, moaning. That was terrifying to me. That was like a good atmosphere to provide, because in the games, I don't know what they built the Spencer Mansion out of in the games, but those walls are soundproof as hell. Can't hear anything clambering around in there. They kind of did the same in the movie too. But yeah, that little sequence there, had that just been the whole movie, I think we've been having a different conversation about it. That's for sure. Yeah,
that's a fair point. And I made this comparison previously that when I watched Infinite Darkness, I really felt like it was a series that didn't really work as a series. It was just a movie that was split into 4 pieces for no reason. And I feel like Welcome to Raccoon City is actually the other way around, where it's a film, but really it works better as a series, where they can really like flesh out sort of what you're doing. They can really flesh out the lore, flesh out the characters, and have time to do that. You can't comprise two games of lore, and these like the Resident Evil lore from Raccoon City to the Arklay Mansion to Umbrella. There's so much there. It's so hard to compress into an hour and 40 minutes. It really is.
And it's funny because when you look at the games, like sure, on the surface level, they look, they're cheesy games. The dialogue's pretty cruddy and a lot of the situations are very unbelievable, but it does its good. It does a good part of establishing a narrative, of establishing just a world of things that are growing around it. You know, when they made that first game, I seriously doubt they knew any idea of what they were going to be moving the story forward on. So the progress they made from the first game up until 3, you know, and building upon, all right, well, now let's go from outside the mansion, let's go to Raccoon City. All right, let's go from Raccoon City to the police force. All right, let's go from the police force and the police station to, you know, just the city hall. And they did a really good job of building on that by way of the game developers. And, you know, it's a shame that we don't get to see that kind of story expansion done on screen, you know, in any kind of film adaptation, because it could really be done well. And as much as I agree with you that it makes sense to, at this point, that if you want to tell the story properly, do it in a series-based medium. You know, as a kid, just growing up, I don't know if that's still a perspective for a lot of people today, but playing your favorite video game meant a lot if you were told that you were going to be able to see it on the big screen, you know. Just like I can imagine like fans of Mortal Kombat when they're told it's going to be on the big screen, you're going to see Mortal Kombat on the screen. I was excited for that, even though I wasn't even a big Mortal Kombat fan. Just any kind of game being told that, all right, now you're going to see this interpretation on the big screen. To me, as a kid, if you made it on the big screen, you made it. That was always the perspective as a child. So I guess, yeah, it would make more sense as a series, although I hate to admit that because it's just this kind of underlying feeling I've always had when I was younger.
No, that's a fair point. Just talking about run times then. Obviously, I know you said it's going to be, 5 episodes part 1, 5 episodes part 2. What sort of run times are you going for?
Pretty much within the 15 to 20 minute runtime, just enough to give like a solid story provided for each one, you know, that it's coherent, it's not rushed, or nothing's kind of just left, like, you know, like you're just talking in the middle of a sentence and they just cut off. You know, it's going to end in a sequence that makes sense so that you can continue on to the next one. But yeah, I'd say that's about a decent time for each one, almost the length of an actual episode. Depends on how I cut everything together with the dialogue and how long each panel, each frame lasts within each sequence. So, yeah, I'd say just for now, expect like a 15 to 20 minute range for each episode.
Glorious. Well, no, it's been a pleasure having you on. Is there anything else you want to kind of get us hyped for, or any details you want to share about episode 1 that you want to kind of quench our get us excited?
It's already been, some of the characters have already been announced. Expect some familiar faces from the games to be, you know, being explored upon, giving more of a solid backstory. I don't want to reveal too much, but Annette Birkin is already involved in it. My whole take on that is I'm not going to take main characters from the game and try to, you know, just plug them into a cool noir-esque, you know, perspective or whatever. I'm definitely drawing upon characters I don't feel like got enough of a solid, you know, runtime or enough of a presentation by the way of the game. So expect some familiar faces coming through, you know, and just expect to see a lot of just what Raccoon City would be looking like as just what would be going on with that particular town, you know, what would be like make for a gritty, seedier side of that underbelly. I will say is if anyone who's like a fan of like, you know, punk rock music, if you ever wondered what a punk rock scene looks like in Raccoon City, well, you're going to find out.
No, that's glorious. And again, like it's worth noting that, you know, it's a collaborative project. You know, I know you're putting the art together, you're getting voice actors in. You also got a very, very good soundtrack. Right.
Also, I'd be ashamed for I didn't even pick up on this. So essentially, this is a 2-man operation with this project. I handle all the photography, the visual side of things, but I got to credit to my partner, Noah Goldberg, who unfortunately couldn't make it. He's busy with work, but he's the one who's been providing the awesome soundtrack that we've been putting together. Me and him, pretty much, we go back many years. We were actually in a band together. He was a drummer in my last band. And this whole soundtrack thing that we got pretty much making ourselves comes from, he converted a guest room of his into a complete, like, mic'd up electronic studio that we were going to use for a rehearsal room. Completely electronic by way of computer. So we could just electronic drums, plug guitar and bass into the computer, put on the headphones, and we could just jam out without making any kind of loud noises to bug neighbors, which meant that we didn't have to pay money for rehearsal studio. So in that sense, me and him already have that musical connection of how, all right, here's what I'm hearing. See what you can work with that. And he's like, all right. And then he just slaps it together in a program, or we just directly go in there, plug in ourselves and bang out a song. That whole intro song to the pilot episode, which sounds like kind of like a jazzy noir-esque type song. That's an unused song that we used in our last band project, and we just rehashed it together. And that's me on guitar, that's him on drums, that's me on bass, and we just slammed it all together. As well as some of the other music we got, where it's not something that sounds like it's composed on a computer, actual guitar work. You can find it online. It's the Jay's Bar theme song. It's kind of a reinterpretation of it. We got a raunchy, bluesy sound to it with slide guitar. That's all my guitarist. That's all my bass drummer, man. Noah. That's all him on slide guitar, playing some sick riffs on that thing.
Oh, glorious! Well, yeah, of course. Give shout out to your man Noah. You guys have got something special here, and I said it, a couple of months ago. You got something special. This is going to be. It's stupidly ambitious anyway. But I think people will be pleasantly surprised. Just keep your pages updated before all that good stuff, and of course, the release on the 30th is going to be the big one. It's great to start. It's great to kind of finish the year, but also start the year on a high. Really, start 2022 on a high. Past episode 1, have you got a roadmap in place for the rest of the episodes?
Oh yeah, definitely. There's a roadmap in place. I will say that I don't want to write off the ending too much, but it's called A Raccoon City Story for a reason. So once everything concludes with, October 1st in 1998, don't expect any kind of continuation from this particular series. I like to have an end with with the stories that I tell. But the roadmap from how we get from, the guard post of the Umbrella Research and Development Facility on December 4th, 1995, from here to October 1st, 1998, that road, it's all paved. It's all ready to go. The only thing that's in process are little side pits, the little one-off stops that you make along the way. But it's going to be a really fun road to go down.
It certainly will. And, if you need anything, you need us to push a bit of promo out, we'd be more than happy to do it, because this is the sort of shit we live for, from Resident Evil modders to art to music to what you're doing. This is all great stuff. This is all, if you're a passionate Resident Evil fan, you need to be tuning into this sort of stuff.
And I will say that regardless of what the situation is, if I have to, because this is not an actual contracted type of project, people who are involved in it are voluntary. It's going to get done regardless of whether or not, certain characters got to be recasted or for however long time it takes. This is something that's like, I would not allow myself to live it down if I didn't finish it. So that's that kind of nagging feeling that just keeps me going throughout this entire thing. So I can guarantee you that regardless of how long it takes, this story is going to have a finish. It's going to have an ending to it.
Glorious. Well, thank you, Shaun. I appreciate you coming on today. As I said, we can't wait to see it. Let's roll on December 30th. And I want to see the fruits of your labor.
Thanks, man. Thanks, Andy, for having me on here, man. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
Indeed. Well, thank you, everyone, for tuning in. This has been Andy from Biohazard Declassified sitting down with Shaun, the writer and director of Carrier, A Raccoon City Story. First episode, of course, coming out December 30th. Hopefully, we'll hear from you very, very soon. Take it easy, guys.
Have a good night.